Stephen Lam, it's good to have you here.
My pleasure.
Can you share a time when you changed a long-held belief and what influenced that change?
Quite a few years ago, when I was still a member of the Hong Kong government, I used to hold the position of Secretary for Constitutional and Mainland Affairs. And in that position, I had to deal with matters relating to elections in Hong Kong. So for several decades, Hong Kong had a law stipulating that prisoners shall not exercise their votes. And for quite some time, I just presumed that this was the right thing to do. Until one fine day, a member of the Legislative Council of Hong Kong took us to court. He applied for a judicial review of the government's position on this matter. And while we were waiting for the court case to be heard, we sought legal advice, and my colleagues, after studying the matter in detail, reported to me that, Stephen, look here, we could lose the court case. And then I revealed within myself, how come we came to a position that prisoners should not vote? And I believe we modeled the Hong Kong legislation on other Western governments' legislation in this field. But when I asked myself very honestly, what was the reason? It was actually very difficult to come up with a complete and justifiable position to prevent prisoners from voting. And therefore, we came up with a contingency plan. If in the High Court of Hong Kong, we lost the case, we had two routes. One route, we could continue to litigate for several years, appeal and appeal. Next route, accept the judgment of the High Court and enact new legislation to enable prisoners to vote. I chose route two because I thought it would be the best for Hong Kong as a community to accept the court's judgment and move on. Eventually, the High Court decided in favor of the prisoners, and within about a year, I put in place new legislation to enable prisoners to vote.
Was there a particular reason as to why you thought prisoners should be allowed to vote?
The original thinking was, since people were put into prison, they would lose their freedom and they wouldn't be able to come out and work and do things which people who are free could do. And therefore, along with that, they would also lose their voting rights. But then when I reviewed the position very clearly, it became clear to me that whilst we put people in prison and they wouldn't be able to see their families every day, they wouldn't be able to go to work every day, it doesn't necessarily mean that they would lose their human rights to vote. And it was actually very difficult to come up with a complete and justifiable rationale for maintaining that position.
Are there any beliefs you feel you will never abandon and why?
Well, for many years, actually several decades, I have been a Christian. And to me, the Christian belief is fundamental to life. I do not think I will abandon that faith at any time. And it is also very important to myself and my family that we adhere to the beliefs of the Christian faith.
How would you describe that impact of your faith on your political actions, if it has had any? And do you think it should influence them?
I think what is very clear is that as Christians, we serve our community faithfully and to the best of our abilities. At the same time, because as Christians, we know this world is imperfect, and therefore human beings like ourselves, even though we are ministers of the government, does not mean that what we come up with is perfect. Rather, in this imperfect world, we human beings will only come up with imperfect answers. And therefore, when I go to the legislature to present our policies and our legislation, I always had that humility of heart to take into account whatever criticisms other people have of the government's position. Because what we do in life by nature cannot be perfect. And therefore, you take into account a spectrum of views and do the best you can to engage as many people and as many views as possible. And then we stand a better chance of getting our election laws, our human rights laws, our social and economic policies correct in the sense that it reflects majority opinion in our community.
What does it mean to disagree well?
Well, it means that you take into account what your opponents suggest and you consider it very seriously. You see, there was this saying in our legislature when we were debating that I don't agree with you, but I will do my utmost to preserve your freedom of speech. So to disagree well means first, to be able to agree to disagree. Second, to respect the position of your opponents. And third, try to come together to a common position which would allow things to proceed in the best interests of society.
Finally, how can schools and universities best promote good disagreement?
Well, I think both at school and at university, we did a lot of debates. And when I was going to Oxford for government training, they have what they call the Oxford Union. And that's the place where students of the university would debate like members of parliament debate in Westminster. So whether it is at school level or at university level, I think it's very important for us to be taught the importance of debates, the importance of having a good structure for your arguments, good justifications which you can present in public, and finally, a very open heart to be able to take into account whatever people who are opposed to you are suggesting. And I think that's how we can promote better debates.